Hey y'all, my name is Miriam and it's time to paint. So grab your paintbrushes and let's get started. Today I want to share some helpful tips and techniques that I think you can start implementing today in your oil painting work. Now before we get started, I do want to give a big shout out to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you all so much. These videos would not be possible without you, and if you find my videos helpful, do consider checking out the page over there. All right. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is shadows. Now, by large, shadows tend to be one of the most mystifying aspects of oil painting, especially when it comes to people who are still trying to improve in their craft, okay? I get a lot of questions about shadows, and by and large, the number one question is, what colors should I mix for my shadows? Now, if you've been following me for a while, my answer should probably come as no surprise to you, but your shadows, just like any of the colors in your painting, are going to depend on the context of the colors around it. Shadows in one painting can be highlights or midtones in another painting, and vice versa. So there's no one way to create shadows, but there is something that tends to be true with all shadows, no matter where they fall in the color spectrum. And that is that typically your shadows are colorful, and you want a nice colorful mix for your shadows. That's why you often hear people say, don't use black in your shadows, or don't use black to darken a color. Now, if you're familiar with my work, you know I love the color black. I use black all the time. Even pure black. I love it, but I would never add it directly into my shadows. And that's because black desaturates your colors, and that's kind of the opposite of what you want. Your shadows tend to be deep, rich, and chromatic. And a lot of times you'll hear artists say your shadows should be transparent or semi-transparent. And that is also a good rule of thumb to go by. It's not always 100% true. You can definitely get nice looking shadows without it, but I'm going to show you my kind of starting point formula for shadows and how I adjust it. Okay, so this is my real palette that I've been working with at the moment, and I'm going to show you how I make the shadow color. Okay, let's start from scratch. I'm going to rip this off and we'll start from new. So my starting base for shadows typically starts with two different colors, olive green dark and Kraplak Rose. So let me put those on my palette. All right, so I've got my palette. I've got Kraplak Rose, olive green dark, Cremnitz White, and a little bit of Gamblin solvent-free gel. This isn't sponsored at all. I just really love this. I love the solvent-free gel and the solvent-free liquid medium. I use these all the time. If you guys are like me, you paint in your house, oftentimes with poor ventilation, and it's important to make sure you're putting your health as priority number one. And because of that, I don't use any harmful solvents or chemicals in my painting process. I love these non-toxic solutions. Okay, so that's what that is. That's my medium that I'm using. So when I want to create a shadow, I'll take a bit of the red, a bit of the green. Let's mix that together. That was really green. We want more of that red. Okay, and so right off the bat, this is like a really deep, dark color. I'm gonna add more red to that. Okay, but what's nice about this color is, I don't know if you guys can tell, it's pretty transparent, this mix, okay? Or at least semi-transparent. And already this do you guys see the deeper shadows under my neck? Like this would be a great starting off point for those deeper shadows that I want to paint, and all I did was mix two colors together. Now, like I said, it doesn't always have to be transparent. If you guys remember, we did this demo, I think over a year ago now. But I had this painting here. This was all opaque paint, and you can see we were able to get some really luminous kind of shadows, and we were able to create a lot of depth. That was all with opaque paints. So all this to say you don't have to do it, but it's a good starting point. And like I said, transparent colors, especially in your darks, helps add a sense of depth. And it's not just an illusion. It is real depth, okay? And I'll put a graphic up here, but with the semi-transparent colors, the light is actually bouncing further, has to travel further distance before it reflects back to your eyes, and it gives the sensation of real depth. So that's why you often hear people say opaques in your lights, transparents in your shadows. Okay, I'm rambling now. Okay, so this would be a good starting off point. Now, why do I have white on here? This is a question I get asked a lot, is do you ever add white to your shadows? And for me, yeah, a lot. This is Cremnitz White. Now, what you need to know about Cremnitz White is it's a wonderful white for oil painting. It's semi-transparent. It mimics the texture of skin. It's luminous. I absolutely love it. But you also need to know it's a lead-based paint. It is lead white. And with that, there comes a lot of health considerations, okay? And you want to make sure you're handling it safely if you do want to use it. So I typically take a little bit of that. Okay, mix it in here. I probably need a little more red in there, okay? And this, I think we need even more warmth. Okay. That would be a good shadow for some of those. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to think, even like some of this reflected light under me, this would be a good base. Okay, so that's like my go-to base. Now, what if you need it cooler or warmer or more opaque, less opaque? Once I have this, I can add my modifiers, and I typically use ultramarine blue if I want it to be cooler or darker. Ultramarine blue is a great way, especially mixed with the green and the red, to make something darker, okay, or cooler. And if I want it to be more opaque, an opaque shadow, I add Van Dyke Brown. I absolutely love Van Dyke Brown. A lot of times I use Van Dyke Brown mixed with Cremnitz White as a base, like a grayed out base for my skin tones, okay? So that's kind of my go-to shadow formulas. A lot of times I'll also add Schwenningen Yellow. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And that just helps to preserve some of the vibrancy. So kind of related to shadows, the next question I often get is about muddy colors. And if you've been around my channel a while, you guys know I love talking about this topic. I try not to talk about it too much, but it's been a while, so I figured we'd go over it. So now, muddy colors, just like our shadows, muddy colors are just colors that are too desaturated for the context of the colors around it. Now, what does that mean? It just means that your colors aren't chromatic enough. They're not colorful enough. So I think people, especially when you're starting out with oil paint, people tend to underestimate just how colorful skin is. And I like to play with this a lot. You guys know in a lot of my paintings, I like to do kind of grayish, pale skin. But if I'm going to paint something realistic, more accurate, then I'm gonna start out with a pretty chromatic, vibrant mix, okay? And so let's mix that up together real quick. Okay, so I just added some Cad Orange, and you can see it's slipping and sliding all over with, and I'm gonna use the Cremnitz White as my base. Now, why is this orange slipping and sliding all over? That's because it is a technically lower grade paint. This is just it's the Gamblin, I think it is their artist line. But there's so much oil in it, as you can see. It slips and slides everywhere. But I love it because I think it makes a great skin tone. I prefer this orange over a lot of my, like I use Old Holland brand paint for the majority of my colors, except for Cad Orange. And I just love the quality, or the nature of the orange. So let me show you. Okay, we're gonna mix titanium, or not titanium white, we're gonna mix Cremnitz White and a little bit of that orange. Okay, and we have this really kind of crazy chromatic color. I might take a little bit of that shadow, bring it in to tone it down. Okay, let's see what we have here. Like off the bat, this one, you know, it'd probably match my, that's a pretty good match just for two colors, right? I mixed my Cad Orange, Cremnitz White, and then I just add a little bit of the shadow color to tone it down. And that's pretty good right out the gate. And as you can see on here, it's, when you see it just up against the gray, it's pretty chromatic. Okay, so this, let's say this is our starting point, right, for our skin tone. Now, what if I want to lighten that? And this is where a lot of people get tripped up, and they get themselves muddy or flat looking colors, because a lot of times they think, okay, well, I have my skin tone, I want to lighten it. And where might you lighten it? When you come up to the forehead, the nose, the cheekbones, here. Basically anywhere where your light source is hitting more because it's closer, you're going to want to lighten it. And so the mistake a lot of people make is they just take their white and they add it into here. And I'm going to add a little bit of this. Okay. And they get a good looking color. At least it looks good on the palette. But then once they put it on their painting, it looks flat and muddy. And that's because when you add white, let me show you on our color chart, you are going straight towards white in a straight line. But typically what happens with skin tones is they travel along something called the chroma curve, okay? And that means that as your colors get lighter, they're not only getting lighter, they're getting slightly more chromatic up until you hit your highest of highlights, okay? So what that means is you need to add your white plus more pure color, plus more orange, okay? And that's how you would paint your lighter colors. I don't know, does that match that? I can't say, I'm like so far away from my monitor, but you get the point. Your light colors, people tend to think that they are more white than they are just because they're light. They're typically incredibly chromatic, okay? Even on this one, she's got really pale light skin, and this is still just a work in progress. But some of these colors up here in the highlights are incredibly chromatic. I used to even use neon oil paints to get to some of those really bright highlights, okay? Oh, and the same thing applies going the other way too. You can also run into muddy colors if you try and mix your midtone directly into your shadow, okay? Without any sort of transitionary color. And that's because the white in your midtones or your highlight, we'll say midtone for this, the white in that is going to bring down the total saturation in that area, and that's going to leave your transition looking dull and muddy and grayed out. And really what you want to do, if you're going to mix a midtone next to a shadow, I don't want to say always, but majority of the time you're going to see a shift towards red or orange, some sort of warmth between those two colors. Okay, and so you end up with a transition oh, can you guys see that? You end up with a transition that looks more warm like this. And let me show you what that looks like in an actual painting. All right, so here you can see a lot of my midtones marked and where they transition into the shadows. And that line where we go from the shadows or the midtones to the shadow is called the terminator, okay? So typically what I like to do on the terminator, just like I did here, I made a more colorful version, a more warm version of that transition. I do the same thing on my terminator. So you can see under the nose when it transitions from mid-tone to shadow, I add a line of warmth. Typically you'll see it under the chin and around the cheekbones as we enter into the shadows. So that's just another way that you can avoid muddy looking tones, okay? All right, our next question is fat over lean. Does it matter? And if so, how much? Now, to answer it plainly, yes, it does matter, but you shouldn't let it like take over your life, okay? You can drive yourself mad with it, especially if you're working in a multi-day process with your painting. So when we talk about lean paints, we typically mean fast drying, less oil added or thinned paints. So if you're adding a paint thinner, that's lean, okay? You're thinning the paint. It doesn't have as high of an oil content. Fatter paints have more oil or medium added, okay? And you can think of, so the way that I typically handle it is I think my thinned paints, my paint out of the tube, and then my paint with medium added. And that's the order that I go in. And once I hit a stage, I don't go back. But I can stay in that stage for a few days while the paint is still workable and work on that with relatively no worry. So if I'm using something like these oil pigment sticks, okay, or if I'm using tube paint, I will typically try and do as much of my process a la prima as possible. I want to always try and get as much done in that first setting as possible. And I will sometimes use a little tiny bit of paint thinner. And for that, I use this. It's Sennelier Green for Oil Non-Toxic Thinner. Again, I don't like to paint with any sort of harmful fumes, but I typically only use a little bit of that. And I will only ever use that on day one. This is just my personal process. A lot of people do it very different. I'm just sharing my process. So I'll do that on day one, get as far as humanly possible into the painting as possible. Then once it's all fully dry, that's typically when I go in and I will, for the most part, just use my paints straight out of the tube on that. Or I'll use like the oil sticks straight out of, just as they are. What I love about these is that they are super workable, so you really don't even need to add anything to it. They blend super easily on their own. So I do like to use those a lot in my beginning stages. Or I'll just use the paint straight out of the tube. Once that's fully dry, that's when I start to add in more of my mediums. And then after that, I'm just careful to add a little bit more medium each time up until the maximum that your medium allows. So for example, this one, you're not supposed to use any more than 25% by volume mixed with your oil paints. So you really don't have like a ton of working room when it comes to it. And for my process, you guys have seen my paintings. I typically do thick applications of paint, a lot of thick opaque colors. It's just my style. It's what I like. And it's an easy enough process to go by. What you don't ever want to do, once you start working with your paints and you're adding medium into it, you're working with a fatter paint, you don't want to go in and add a lean on top of that. Because I've learned it the hard way, your painting will crack. And it's not fun. And it might look good in the moment. And you're like, oh, this doesn't matter so much. And then, you see your painting down the line. You're like, uh-oh. So you definitely don't want to do that, okay? I'm trying to think. I think that's it. Those are the big questions that I wanted to go over today. If you have any other questions, let me know, and I'm happy to answer them. All right, bye guys.